All right. Good morning. Thank you for coming out on a beautiful day when you could be home raking leaves. So appreciate your coming out. I give two kinds of talks. The tame talk is about history, the founding fathers, and I give these talks to regular people. And then there's the metaphysical talk that I only give to you guys. I would not give it to anyone else. Because I believe that you are kind of on the same wavelength I am. We're doing this journey together, and that you will not think that I am batshit crazy and have lost my marbles, especially as we proceed through this program. So some of what you will hear later today in the second half of the talk is pretty far out by regular people's standards. But you all are seekers, and we love seekers. So, as Tom was saying, my journey began. I've always been spiritually curious, and I was fairly spiritual as a teenager, just with traditional religion. My mother lost a child tragically, and when I was 7, and then she used that to become a very spiritual person, and so some of that kind of rubbed off on me. And then I got away from it, and young adulthood and middle age. And then I came back on a path after my husband died. So my serious journey into the other side began with the death of my husband, as Tom said. So this brought me, and I'll talk about the steps that I took into the studying near-death experiences, reincarnation, life between lives, and mediumship. So along the way, I became aware of something called a past life regression. And I think I probably heard that here in this room, in the other rooms. And so a couple of years ago, my now husband, Jim, had a big birthday coming up. And I thought about a gift. And I said, well, what do you give the man who doesn't need anything? I got it, a past life regression. He'd never had one. I don't think you'd even heard of the concept before until we came here to Ions. So I gave him a check for a past life session with Carol Louie. And he's always open to new experiences, and he was curious about what might happen. So at the end of the program, he will tell you about his amazing experience. As a 15th century Chinese navigator for a large treasure fleet, how many people in here have had a guided past life experience regression? Okay. And maybe some of those on Zoom as well. So learning about past life regressions happened late in my metaphysical journey in the last couple of years, I guess, or 3 years. Okay. Yeah. So I'll begin with my early journey. And so Ned died in 2013, and some of his dear friends are here, the Faulkners, and Donnie Faulkner's here on Zoom from Vermont. Some of the rest of you, Tom, I think you may have known him too. So the death of a loved one can cause many reactions in us. We can just dwell in morbid grief and self-pity, but in my case, it led to a quest. I wanted to know where he went, where we all go after we leave our bodies, what we do when we get there, and the point of it all. Just a few simple questions, just the secrets of the universe. I just wanted to know the secrets of the universe. So a lot of this journey is covered in my book on the right that's published a year ago of Loss and Love. And it starts with Ned's death and how I was processing that. And so it's like a little journal, and journal in verse and prose. And I was an English major, but I never wrote poetry before. But after Ned died, these ideas started coming to me that I felt needed expression. So I'd get a yellow notepad and I would write down the idea, and then I would turn it into verse. Now, I like to call them reflections because a lot of people don't read poetry anymore, or never did, never liked it. And so I call them reflections. So a friend of mine when I was giving a couple of talks about the book, she said, well, you need to come up with a really catchy title. So I recalled a famous saying from a movie, get busy living or get busy dying. That's one of Jim's favorite expressions. Does anybody remember what movie that came from? The Shawshank Redemption. And based on a novel by Stephen King, who knew how to turn a phrase. So I think this piece of advice, get busy living or get busy dying, is quite profound, especially if you've lost someone and are kind of in a funk, don't feel like living, or at least living life to its fullest. So this is the underlying theme of that book. So next slide. So I was on, right after he died, I was on a parallel journey. I was on a serious journey of history, writing that first book on the left. Very much in the material world, had to go to libraries and research books and articles and footnotes and bibliography and all that. And then I was also on this other spiritual path, and I was writing the reflections. So the book on the left was published in 2018, and it is a biography of George Wythe, who I admire very much. He was called the forgotten founding father, but he had really, in my opinion, much more to do with the early success of this country than Patrick Henry, who gets all the publicity for just running his mouth, in my opinion. But anyway, he was very consequential. But for some reason, I had trouble focusing at home, even though I was living at home. And I would go to these retreats, some writing retreats and some spiritual retreats. And I went online, and I grew up in the Episcopal Church, so I looked for all the Episcopal retreats I could find. And I found one down in North Carolina on Emerald Isle. That's very inexpensive vacation if anybody's looking for one. And Shrine Mont and writing, various Nimrod Hall, various writing retreats. And I found someone said, well, why don't you go up to Richmond Hill? How many of you have had experience at Richmond Hill? Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful place on Church Hill. So I started going up there for 48 hours at a time. And even though I was going to all these places by myself, my book became my friend. You know, it was a reason for me to take a little trip by myself, get in my car, drive someplace by myself, and close the door and work on the book for 2 or 3 days at a time. So I went up to Richmond Hill, and this was built. The original Richmond Hill was built by 4 nuns, Catholic nuns, after the Civil War. They came down here to pray for Richmond, and Richmond needed a lot of prayer at that time. And so it later evolved into an ecumenical spiritual retreat. So I would go up there and spend 48 hours at a time, and I really liked it. They have pretty good food there, and 3 meals a day. And I was asked to, they said, well, we don't have many writers who come up here just for a writing retreat. We would like for you to join into our spiritual community. Well, I didn't know what that meant, but it meant getting up at 7 for 7 o'clock prayers, noon prayers, and 5 o'clock prayers, which are pretty short in the chapel. Chapel's very beautiful. But anyway, every day of the week, they pray for the metropolitan Richmond. One day for Richmond City, another day for Hanover, another day for Chesterfield. So I used to go up there on Tuesdays when we were praying for Hanover. And so I knew the Commonwealth's attorney. And I said, Sterling, I hope you felt us praying for you the other day. We sent some prayers your way. And so anybody who's been to Richmond Hill knows that if you've ever stayed there overnight, there are the quarters where the senior nuns stayed, and then the junior nuns stayed. The junior nuns were in a dormitory, and the senior nuns got a private room with a bath. So I was asked to stay in the senior nuns' room. So I told my family, I said, if you need me, I'll be in the Immaculate Conception room. So then I'd come home and I'd forget the history book for a while, and I'd start writing verse. and I would write them down on a yellow notepad till I was satisfied with the verse. And anybody who's lost a loved one will relate to the early poems in that book. So after a while, I stopped writing the sad reflections, and I began to come out of the widow's, what they call the widow's fog. Widow's fog. So slide. So then I went on a mindfulness journey, and I tried to appreciate life's gifts for us, large and small. And in verse, I visited our 5 wonderful senses that our Creator has given us. And I wrote poems about each of them. So the sense of taste is something that we Americans are not very good at in terms of savoring our food, closing our eyes and mindfully savoring the gift of taste, the gift of food. The French people, they say, are much better at that because they'll spend like 2 hours on lunch. But we just gobble our food, or we have the news on, and, we're not thinking about really what we eat. So I wrote, after I had made myself a sandwich, I wrote a poem about it. This is called The Sandwich. I made a summer sandwich, a sensation of the season, with the plumpest juicy red tomato, the smoothest creamy mayonnaise, and the thinnest white toast. I prepared it carefully, slicing it just right. Then I rushed it to its finish. I didn't say I gobbled it down, but I rushed it to its finish. Soon I wanted it back. I forgot to savor it slowly, mindfully, deliciously, to enjoy every sweet sensation as I scurried through nature's lovely gift. Isn't that life? We rush it down, then we wish our days were back, to savor slowly, mindfully, deliciously, to relive those lovely hours that we mindlessly let slip away. So now we pause for a little exercise in mindfulness. Jim's going to pass out the candy. Don't eat it just yet. Sorry, you people on Zoom, you're not getting the candy, but you can pretend.
I noticed someone coughing on Zoom. Please mute yourself.
We're passing out candy, Zoom people. Make sure Dan gets a piece. Now, don't eat this just yet, but think about how you would normally eat that piece of candy, probably in 2 quick bites. Okay, I want you to take 10 or 20 seconds to eat this piece of candy. I want you to close your eyes and eat it in very small bites. And don't think of anything else. Clear your mind and don't think of anything else except for this gift of chocolate and mint, the delightful blend of 2 wonderful elements from Mother Nature, cocoa berry and leaves of mint. So just close your eyes, savor it, eat it in very small bites. There's extra, yeah. So this is enjoying the moment. Just eating 1 piece of candy can be a mindful experience. The definition of mindfulness is a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment. Now, we in America are always on the run. It's hard for us to sit down and focus and maybe just have a blank mind, just not think of anything. We're always thinking or worrying. So I often tell myself, stop and smell the roses, slow down, appreciate experience, slow down. So the next time we eat an apple or a peach, we can close our eyes and think of how these gifts came to our table. There's first the sun, the rain, and the soil, Mother Nature. Then the farmer, the farm worker, the truck driver, the grocery store clerk. We bless all those in the chain that brought us our food. So going through the five senses, we come to the gift of sight. And I wrote a poem called Sunsets after an experience that I'd had with a sunset. And how blind we are to, very often, to the beauty that's around us. We're so busy with the little chatterboxes that are in the front of our heads. So this poem is called Sunsets. The sunset was spectacular. Splashes of gold and pink and coral across a sapphire sky. I was busy. I paused to try to store the sight, to pull it from memory later when there was time. But we can never really store a sunset in all of its vibrance and passing splendor. Each sunset is here only once and will not appear again. Tomorrow I will linger longer, pausing on the run to absorb the passing vision of clouds and sky and sun. And I will learn to try. I will try to learn to treasure those fleeting, radiant moments. So the next slide is called the tree hugger. So part of my therapy when I was living alone, processing my aloneness, was to take walks in nature. And nature, as we all know, is a great healer. So one of my favorite places is Roslyn. How many people have been to Roslyn off River Road? It's a wonderful retreat. I used to stay there for 48 hours too. So I loved walking at Roslyn because they have the most beautiful ancient trees there. You know, they're hundreds of years old. And beautiful pasture high above the river. It's a wonderful place. So this poem is called The Tree Hugger. I used to smile when they talked about the tree huggers, Don Quixotes of the woods, youthful lovers of old living things, defenders of timbers, young bodies pressed against ancient bark, daring men with saws to make their mark. I understand now. A tree of 50 years is a very special thing. A tree of 1,000 links with eternity. Some trees are made for raising houses, others for nourishing souls. I love the old gnarled things, whipped by winter winds, nuzzled by May breezes, opening their world-worn arms to me. Lately, I have learned that we are all related, all wed in the subatomic energy field of nature's worldwide web. We are kindred spirits, linked by physics in cosmic ways we cannot see. I took a walk in the country today. It was a lonely time to think and feel, a necessary time to heal. I followed a solitary trail along streams and valleys and fields. The forest seemed to beckon me. Alone in my reverie, free to do a childish thing, with no one watching, I gently hugged a tree. So after Ned died, I would go outside and I would look at the stars in the dark sky. And I would say, where are you? I'm not hearing anything. I'm not getting any signals, nothing. It's just dark out there, and I'm just hearing crickets. So I started reading. And so the next poem is The Bookshelf. So for a while, I lost interest in fiction. I didn't want to read fiction. I wanted to find out more about the universe, the non-physical universe. So this poem, and this is, I think, the last one. Yeah, last poem, is called The Bookshelf. I put novels aside the day he died. I didn't want fiction. I wanted to know the truth about where he had gone. I read books about those who died and then returned. They do not lie about what they learned. I sought the wisdom of mediums, psychics, and mystics about parallel dimensions and quantum physics, and the universe deep and wide, about the fluid nature of our spirits and what it's like on the other side. I learned of connectivity with all living things on all living planes, and after we roam, the place called home. I cleared a space for my new reads, my cosmic bookshelf. This is where I confirmed my view of God and why we are here. It is all very simple. God is love. We are here to learn to love. Nothing else matters. Our matter does not matter. We are souls encased in bodies, waiting to be free. He is free and is waiting for me. He is loving life on the other side. So, my first baby step into the non-physical world was an explanation of the near-death experience. How many people have read Dr. Moody's book in here? Okay, classic. We owe Dr. Moody a great debt. So, as you know, some of you know, a very brave physician, Raymond Moody, broke revolutionary new ground in 1975 with this book on the left, Life After Life. Since then, 13 million copies have been sold worldwide in numerous different languages. People are hungry for this information, people who are curious. So after Dr. Moody's book, I read more than 36 other books by compilations of near-death experiences by medical doctors and PhD researchers, and also a lot of personal memoirs that people wrote of their NDEs. Very, very moving. And so at night, when I'm trying to go to sleep and I've got the little gerbil going in my head, and I can't get out of my own stupid thoughts, I will listen to an NDE experience, somebody actually telling their experience. And these accounts have really, really helped me in my spiritual growth. The largest accumulation of near-death experiences is from the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS. And they have regular meetings. They're very inspiring. And practically every day they will have something on YouTube, something new, some new encounter that somebody's had. So this was my way of kind of going outside of organized religion to see, people who've actually died and most experience heaven. Now the people who give these testimonials are not like holy rollers having an experience, an emotional experience in church that lots of times will wear off and they'll become judgmental and mean again. But these are life-altering experiences that people have. They're never the same again when they come back in their bodies after an out-of-body experience. And so a lot of these people were agnostics, atheists, nonconformists before their experiences. Many of them had had very traumatic lives. I think there might be a link to that, abuse as children. Or a lot of them had abused themselves with drugs and alcohol, that sort of thing. But the end was very traumatic when they left their bodies for seconds or minutes. So I think that I can detect falsehoods in people when people are not being honest. And I do believe these people, listen to their stories. They're important to me. So Dr. Moody was a groundbreaker in 1975 with this book. And he was the first. He put his reputation on the line. He was very, very brave to put this book out there. And he was ridiculed, and probably is still being ridiculed by the materialists. He's still alive, and he's one of the great gurus of our age. Now, another brave physician who put himself on the line, his reputation on the line, at a very early time in all this awakening, it's Dr. George Ritchie. Did anybody know Tom? You probably knew, some of you knew Dr. Ritchie, right? No kidding. Yeah. So he was born in Richmond, went off in World War II in the Army, and and he came back to Richmond after his near-death experience and told a few people about it. Um, but and then he wrote this book that you see on the right, Return from Tomorrow, and he did that pretty early, and I think that was 1978 was the first one. But he was 20 years old. He wasn't a bad boy. He was a nice boy. But he was anticipating all the good things that would come when he became a medical doctor, like a big new car, a new house, status, ego, all that. And on the side, he could help people too. But maybe he wasn't like totally well motivated. But after his near-death experience, he changed and he became a wonderful, giving, loving person. So he had his NDE at age 20 as a soldier in an army hospital in Texas. And 9 minutes later, he returned to life after this amazing experience that he had. And so just reading, you don't have to have an NDE or a profound spiritual experience yourself. A lot of people report being changed simply by reading about other people's experiences. And that has happened to me. I've never had what I would call a profound spiritual experience, but I like reading other people's experience. So apparently his talking about his NDE didn't really hurt his career that much because he came back to Richmond and he was president of the Richmond Academy of General Practice, and he died in 2007. So any of you who are very familiar with the near-death experience will know that there are certain commonalities that they have. And these people are flatlined. They're clinically dead. The people will pull the sheet up over them because they're dead, dead, dead. There's no movement in the heart. There's no movement in the mind. They're not hallucinating, they say. They're not dreaming because dreams, as we all know, fade very quickly. These people have had the near-death experience. They remember every single detail of that 20 years later. It was real to them. So at some point they revive and they come back to tell the story. But here are the commonalities of the NDE people. First, they report separating from their bodies. They're floating above and beyond, but they still have their own personalities and they don't understand that. Well, I think that's me down there on the table, but I'm up here too. How can that be? And a lot of them are very puzzled. They don't know they're dead. And they don't identify with the meat body that's down on the table. You know, that's kind of ugly to them. But they're floating around and they get to float through the hospital and see what other people are doing in the hospital. And one of them floated up through the hospital ceiling, hospital roof, and there was a tennis shoe on the roof that nobody else had seen. But when he came back to tell about it, sure enough, there was a tennis shoe on the roof. There's no way that person would have known that. So they separate from their bodies, but they still have their own personalities, which is a big reason that we need to, when we separate, we should be having good thoughts. You know, we should make amends with everybody and be in a good place when we separate. There is no more pain, only a feeling of blissful peace. And then this is the part that really I relate to. They are all, a few people have a hellish experience, but they do get out of it. And then they get into the love like everybody else. But everybody, without exception, who has an NDE at some point during the NDE experiences an overwhelming sense of unconditional love, such as they have never had before. Take the love of the most wonderful mother for a child and multiply that 1,000,000 times. That's what they feel. Many enter something akin to a tunnel with a light at the end of the tunnel. We've all heard that saying. There's light at the end of the tunnel. That's based on probably people who've had NDEs. As they near the light, they feel their home where they have been before and are welcomed. Many have something called a life review, where they're shown not what they did in giving $10 million to the art museum or to some philanthropy. That never shows up because a lot of that's based on ego. If it's based on wanting to help people, that's different. But anything you've done out of ego, president of a big corporation, whatever, none of that counts in your life review. The only thing that counts in this life review is judgment, but it's not the judgment that a lot of people were brought up with in church, which is harsh, punishing, kind of mean. This is very kind and gentle review. And nobody judges us. We judge ourselves. We are shown in a panorama very quickly our entire life. I don't know how it works. Don't ask me how it works. But every single thing we did that affected another person that's of significance is shown in that review. Now, a little boy who bullied another little boy on the playground at age 7, that'll show up. It'll show up about how that other little boy felt when he was hit and verbally abused. You'll feel that. He felt that. You'll also see the reverberations, the ripple effect of any good that we've done, any time we made people feel better for our presence, any love that we gave. There's a ripple effect for that. So we're shown everything, good, the bad, and the ugly. But it's very objective, and it's not punishing. It's just done to make us learn. We're here to learn in this playground called Earth, to learn how to play in the playground and to learn how to love. So then, after the life review, well, you've heard the expression, I almost died, I saw my whole life flash in front of me. How many people have heard that? Well, that was based on near-death experiences. So that's what happens. So many encounter spiritual beings and are also reunited with their departed family members and friends. Now, you all have heard PMH Atwater, you've heard Jeffrey Long, and others talk about their research. So there are a lot of people in here who are very familiar with the near-death experience story. So now we move on to the next step. Okay. Okay, here we are. The next step in my journey was an exploration of reincarnation. So I read Many Lives, Many Masters. How many people have read this book? It's the classic. Dr. Weiss, not sure how to pronounce his name, Brian Weiss, was head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami. Jewish, never believed in the afterlife. Particularly, I never really thought about it. And he would treat his patients through hypnosis, pretty deep hypnosis. And he stumbled on reincarnation and wrote this book. Now, a lot of us think of reincarnation as some Eastern belief that's maybe woo-woo. That's how it's thought of in a lot of America. But it does have its roots in Western thought as well. Many of our classic Greek philosophers understood that this was the way the universe is organized. And that includes Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras. These are heavy hitters, not woo-woo people. And in fact, what I've learned is there was a very strong early belief, early Christians and a lot of early Jewish people um, believed in reincarnation. I don't like to use the word believe because it connotes religious thought. I'll say understood reincarnation. Now, what I learned fairly recently, and I think I heard some of this here, is that this understanding of the early Christians was squashed by a Roman emperor who wasn't particularly Christian. In the 6th century, the Roman Emperor Justinian. Now, this was the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, and they'd lost their military clout. So they were seeking a god that would be strong for them. And they looked at a lot of different gods, and at that time, Christianity was becoming popular with the people. Constantine's mother, some centuries before that, had become Christianized. Constantine, in my opinion, was not a Christian. He thought he saw a cloud up in the sky that was in the shape of a cross. He had victory on the battlefield, and he began to weaponize Christianity. And the popes after that had their own armies, and we all know how Christianity has become weaponized. Anyway, Justinian, the Emperor Justinian, since the military power of the Roman Empire had gone away, the church became another way for them to exercise power and control over people. And the Holy Roman Empire took over most of Europe eventually. So Justinian in the 6th century said, you can no longer believe in reincarnation. I outlaw it. And he jailed the Pope for a year until he agreed to ban the teaching. So it was all about power, control, and eventually financial gain through religion. Now, I'm not knocking all organized religion here, because we all know some very good churches, including some of the American Roman Catholic, not Roman Catholic, the American Catholic churches, who all do good work, the work of God. So I'm not knocking all organized religion, but it has had a very checkered past, especially in the Renaissance. So the findings are that this is not our only rodeo. We've been around many times before. We are eternal souls. Now, Dr. Weiss was a skeptic, and he discovered reincarnation by accident. He had a patient under deep hypnosis. She had multiple phobias and dysfunctional relationships. She was just a basket case. But she was the one who brought up in deep hypnosis her past lives. And every time a past life was brought up, there was a trauma attached to it. And once that was recognized, that trauma, that dysfunction went away. She didn't have to deal with that anymore in this lifetime. So in Richmond and elsewhere, we have a number of therapists who do specialize in past life regressions. I've had a session with Carol Louie and with Faith Greiger. I've also heard about some of my past lives through my sessions with mediums. They'll tell me about some of those. Okay, so next slide is life between lives. And so my next book after that was Journey of Souls, Dr. Michael Newton, PhD. Have any of you read this book? Are you familiar with it? Okay. I highly recommend it. Also, if you want to read the book, it's on YouTube. I listen to it on YouTube. So this Dr. Newton, very well-respected psychologist, also kind of stumbled on life between lives, like Dr. Weiss had stumbled on reincarnation, by listening to his patients during their sessions in deep hypnosis. So they not only recall their past lives, but also what they did between their lives. And he has thousands of documented cases. And so heaven is, there is heaven, according to these people. It's a time of healing, study, recreation, reunion with family and friends, and it's kind of like a vacation. So I've often said, well, I don't want to come back to Earth. Why would I want to come back here? Like, I want to stay on vacation the whole time. this is a lousy place to live, all the sickness and war and all that going on. And but so I've heard that after a while when you're on vacation, you kind of want to get back to real life, sort of the way it is on the other side. That there's certain things that without a body that you don't experience that you do experience with a body, and also for the growth of our souls, we need to incarnate and have different experiences. So I brought a partial reading list of the books that I've read. It's on the back table if anybody's interested. But part of the preparation on the other side, in between lives, is planning what we're going to do in our next life. And the life review is a very important part of that because we look at our failings. We look at when we were not kind, when we did not love, when we did not forgive. And so we try to do better the next time around. We have do-overs in reincarnation. And so we have a very intricate plan with our guides, but also with our soul families. One thing my late husband, Ned, said, you'll all be interested in this, foreigners, was that Jim, my now husband, was part of our soul family, that we have all reincarnated together. And that's why we get along so well, So I don't believe there's anything called love at first sight. It's not really first sight. You've known that soul before. If you really, really relate to that soul, there's experience there. By the way, Ned gave an okay to Jim. He didn't want me to be lonely. And he said Jim was a good guy. So, the next journey, or actually I started this journey pretty quickly after Ned died, was experience with mediums. So I used to go a lot to a writing retreat called Nimrod Hall. And there were unpublished authors there like me at the time and published authors. And so the published authors were asked to put their books out on the table. And I saw this book called Friends in High Places. And the author was Katie Letcher Lyle. Did anybody know Katie? She's from Lexington. She's dead now. Anyway, Katie was a ghostbuster, and she and fellow ghostbusters would clear haunted buildings and Civil War battlefields. There was a soldier there who was stuck in a battlefield. He didn't know he was dead. He was hoping for his troops to come over the hill anytime. He'd been stuck there since the Civil War. So the Ghostbusters said, "Hey, you're dead, buddy. Go." And so they released his spirit to where it was supposed to go. Sounds crazy, but I've heard a lot about that. So I was very intrigued by her book. She said she was a medium. This is 6 months after Ned died. And so I said very timidly to her, do you think you could channel my late husband? So she said, yeah, probably. And she said, you could do it if you train yourself. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'll let you do it. And so she went in her room, we were suite mates, with a yellow notepad, and she came back 20, 30 minutes later, and she described him perfectly. She'd never met him, but she described him perfectly. So then, as Tom said, I came to Ions and I heard Irene Kendig speak about the book on the right. Conversations with Jerry and other people I thought were dead. Well, she won some national book awards for that book. You know, it had some credibility. And she talked about the medium that she had used, although she should have given the medium credit on the cover, which I do, because I use the same medium. Anyway, she chose an experienced medium whose name is Jana Anna. She lives in Bloomington, Indiana, and she conducts her sessions by phone. So at this writer, Irene, was skeptical about mediums. But at the end of the 8 sessions that she had with Jana, including with her mother, she had kind of a stiff relationship with her mother, and she wanted to explore that. Her mother came through. All the people came through, each one very different. And so at the end of the sessions, she was convinced that she had connected with the real beings. So after that, I said, well, if this medium's so good, maybe I'll call her up. I was very timid about it. And so I did, and I guess that was around 2014, 15. And since then, I've had many, many sessions with her, including the metaphysical book about Thomas Jefferson. And I've talked with my parents and my friends. And I had one friend over. We had lost a dear friend of ours. There were three of us who were very close friends, and one of them died. And so my other friend, who was still around, was open-minded, but needed to be convinced. So I said, well, come over to my house and we'll dial up Phoebe. So she came over to my house, and we got in a bedroom and closed the door. And the medium called when she was supposed to call. So we asked Phoebe some questions, our mutual friend. And she really seemed to come through because she had things to say about her children. We had some concerns about her children, and she had some things to say about that. So we thought we had really gotten the right person. Anyway, so the medium said, Debbie, she said, do you have a brother? Of course, she didn't know Debbie. And Debbie said yes. And she said, Debbie, your brother needs you now. So Debbie got in her car. She called her brother. First thing her brother said was, Debbie, I need you now. His daughter had been diagnosed with cancer, and they needed Debbie's support. Anyway, after that, Debbie was a believer. And since then, I've had different friends come over to my house and say, come over, we'll dial up your daddy if you want. And they've had, very profound experiences. I get things rolling with the medium and make them feel comfortable. And then I leave, close the door, and let them have their own private session. And then I say, well, if you have any time left over, give it to me, because you have to pay by the hour. It's not very expensive. And said, I'll talk to some of my people. So I've had several friends come over. And if you want to connect with any departed people, let me know, and I'll set up an appointment for you. And if you're too timid to do it at home, come over to my house. We'll do it together. So next, before we leave here, mediums are being studied at the university level. They do have differences in their brain waves, and at some point there will be more clinical research on verifiable readings. Okay. So I thought, if we can communicate with regular people, well, why can't I communicate with somebody famous? Like, are they too busy or too smart for me, Like, would I be bothering them? Aren't they really busy? Anyway, I had written about Thomas Jefferson in that first book, about the first part of his life. I knew a lot about him. And so I said, well, what the heck? I'm going to ask for Thomas Jefferson. So I didn't tell the medium in advance who I wanted to connect with. She had no knowledge of that. And so when I asked for Thomas Jefferson, she paused a little bit, and, we waited. And there's a kind of a green light on the other side. When you're thinking about somebody, I don't really know how it works, but they are aware that they're being thought of. And they kind of get ready to talk to you if you have an opening. So, so the first historic character that before I did the Jefferson book, I was writing that book, that biography of George Wythe, there's nothing metaphysical in there, all that's based on history. But I wanted to know why I was so interested in this man. Why did I spend 5 years of my life writing about him? I mean, there must be some connection there. So I asked that in a session. And George Wythe came in. I told you all about this before in my talk. But anyway, Wythe was an exceptional founding father, well-motivated, Quaker background, educated some of the best leaders in America, got us off to the right start. Scholar, gentleman. So, as it turned out, the medium told me that I had had a past life in Colonial Williamsburg, and that indeed I had a close relationship with George Wythe. She said it was sort of sisterly. So I don't know whether I was his sister, but I'm guessing maybe I would have been his brother-in-law's wife. I'm guessing that. Anyway, he used to come over to my house. We used to have brandy, and we used to talk politics and government. I've always been interested in politics and government. So according to Wythe, he said I had given him some of his best ideas. But because I was female, and females are universally considered intellectually inferior to men, and having no good ideas of their own of any importance regarding government, he could never say where he had gotten those ideas. He took credit for those ideas himself. And since he was Thomas Jefferson's mentor, Jefferson was known to take other people's ideas and run with them, as he did in the Declaration of Independence. And so I thought, well, when I write about drafting America's first religious freedom law, maybe I had a hand in that too. Who knows? But I swear I didn't really make that up, that just came out. It would be fun if it were true. So back to Thomas Jefferson. I did ask the medium to bring him through, and he said something like, well, let me dust off that persona. And I never heard his voice, of course, but if you read the book, I have copies of the book back there if anybody's interested. If you read the book, it sounds just like Jefferson, and very high-minded. And so I asked him about, do we have a book here? And he said possibly. So I had 8 sessions with this entity presenting as Thomas Jefferson. I had my own questions, but I thought, well, maybe I'll ask Jeffersonian historians what they would ask. Of course, I didn't tell them what I was up to. They would never have participated with me if I'd said I was working with a medium to access Thomas Jefferson. So I said, I'm working on a class project, and we're saying, if Thomas Jefferson were alive today, what questions would you ask him? So several historians gave me some very good questions that I did not think about myself, and they're in the book. Later on, I sent them the manuscript, but I never heard back. They all thought I was crazy. But you're either going to believe it or not. But even if you don't believe in that process, the book is still worth reading, even if you believe that I wrote every word, which I didn't. I just transcribed it. So one of the questions was about his relationship with the beautiful slave woman, Sally Hemings, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I won't go in. I'll answer questions about what Jefferson said about our institutions, about our government, the media, use of our military, organized religion, higher education. He had comments about that. But I did speak to you all before on that, but I will answer questions later. Anyway, the next book, anybody know about Leonard Cohen? Anybody a fan of his music? Okay. So, I guess it was a year or so ago, I exercise at home on carpet barefoot to music. I dance around and do stretching exercises and stuff. Anyway, so the music I had on one day was Cohen's wonderful song, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. And it was a harp version. And I thought, that is really a wonderful, wonderful piece of music, one of the best pieces ever written. And I said, I wonder if Leonard has anything to say to us. So I looked at that picture of him. I said, do you have anything to say? And so I just got the feeling that maybe he'd be an interesting person to talk to. So I had 6 sessions with an entity who presented himself as Leonard Cohen. I have not published that book because I don't want to totally ruin my reputation right now. I just published a serious work of history this summer, and I'm going to wait a while, but I am going to publish that book. Now, a friend of mine said, who's a materialist, when I came out with the Jefferson book, she said, oh, I wish you hadn't put your name on that book. She said, that just, people are just going to think you're crazy, and it really destroys your credibility. And so anyway, I thought I was going to use pseudonyms for my any future books I do, channeling spirits. But then more recently, I thought, well, what the heck? I'm not going to write any more history. Because, yeah, sorry. Whoever wrote that, maybe they want a session. Dialing in. Yeah, it's all right. So anyway, I'm not going to write any more history books because they're too much work and I'm too old to do that kind of work. And I don't like doing footnotes and bibliographies. So I think if I do write any more books, they will be some channeling books. If I feel like it. I'm only going to do it when the Spirit moves me. So it might be the metaphysical so-and-so. So back to Leonard Cohen. I was really curious. I printed out the lyrics to about 30 of his songs. And all of the lyrics were dark. They were cynical. And even Hallelujah, if you listen to the lyrics of that, there's some darkness in that. And I wondered why, why? Why do you write all that darkness? And so I found out, I asked him about him. And he had a very unhappy childhood. He had a mother who was, he said, crazy and was not capable of giving him the love that he craved. And his father died early, and he had no good role models for love, for married love or romantic love or parental love. And so he went through his entire life seeking love and never really found it. He would have hot physical relationship with somebody, and that'd be glorious. But then it would fade away, and they'd start to hate each other. So a lot of dysfunction there. So I said, oh, we would love to have a song from you from Spirit, maybe a more positive song. Can you write a song for us and send it to me? He said, no, we don't do that on the other side. I said, well, what do you do? He said, composers do not compose on the other side. This is what we do in physical form on earth. He said, on the other side, he and others act as muses to us on this plane, but only if we are attuned to receiving inspiration. They don't go around knocking on people's heads, I'm going to give you inspiration. You have to be open to it. You have to be a fan of his music and kind of be in the mood. So he and other musicians, and this goes for artists and writers, help those who are open to their help, but you have to be open to it. So I divided our conversations into different chapters. There's one on nature. He spoke of the great need for us to reconnect with nature, to eat from local natural sources, to honor our bodies. He said that as he transitioned, he looked back on his puny, tired old body that he had abused. He used drugs and alcohol and smoked a lot. He said, holy shit, look at that. I wish I'd taken better care of myself. Now, that was Leonard. Thomas Jefferson would never talk like that, you know. So each personality had its own cadence. He wrote this book, this song piece called The Tower of Song. Has anybody heard The Tower of Song? Okay. And he talks in that about the corrupt music industry, and it almost destroyed him. I asked him about his past life and if he'd been a musician in some of his past lives, and he said he had been in the courts of kings. You know, he'd been played the lute or whatever. And he said, but you had to be really on the ball because off with your head. You know, king would chop your head off if he was not satisfied with your music. And he said, today the critics did that to me. You know, they would deprive me of my income with a negative review of any of my work. It was just as bad. So he said that in this piece, The Tower of Song, he writes about Hank Williams Sr. coughing up above in the Tower of Song. You can hear him. It's Tower of Song. Hank is up there coughing because he's deceased. So during our last session, Hank made a cameo appearance because we were talking about him. And again, there's kind of a green light. And I had, I asked Leonard, I said, do you think we have a book? He said, well, you know, maybe other musicians would want to share in this. And I said, no, I think you're interesting enough for a book. He said, well, maybe Hank Williams. So anyway, we'd been talking about Hank Williams. So Hank died early of an alcoholic death in his late 20s. He killed himself with self-hatred and unworthiness. And he also had a bad childhood. When he spoke, he said he had a shitty childhood. So I've read the lives of many composers and other artists, and it seems that pain and suffering has often been a catalyst for great creativity. Tchaikovsky, for example, was very gender confused and had kind of an unhappy life. But great beauty came from that. So no pain, no gain. So the medium brought Hank into the conversation, and he was very honest about his problems on earth. He said that he never felt worthy of the fame that he had during his lifetime. The songs came easy to him, and he had a really negative self-image. He said he is, in his present form, he is still working on loving himself now in the afterlife. And he was surprised that I would even want to talk to him. You know, a puny little guy like me, you want to talk to me? So it takes some souls time to heal on the other side if they've had lives without love. So this extra piece of weirdness is included in this book. Now, during my sessions with the medium, I've encountered several souls that I would call opportunistic spirits. They take the opportunity of an open portal. They enter a channeling conversation unexpectedly. They're not invited. They just pop in. And they have something pertinent to say to the conversation that's going on. Now, on one occasion, when I guess we were talking about my work on the Founding Fathers and on early American history, the medium said, there's a female spirit who really wants to come in. She's really talkative, and she's very assertive. So let's let her in. So she said she wanted to say loud and clear that women had a key role in the success of the revolution and in getting this country off to the right start, and never forget that. She didn't give her name, but after a while I concluded that she must be who? Abigail Adams. So the medium said that she had a kind of an inkling that that might be who was coming through. So as some of you know, Abigail wrote the famous message to her husband, who became President John Adams. And this letter is known as Remember the Women letter. And this is a scolding of the men who secured liberty for themselves but were not willing to grant the vote or basic legal rights to women. Women couldn't own property. As soon as you married, your husband took over, even if he was a terrible alcoholic. and then ran your fortune into the ground. So 18th century men universally had a very low opinion of the intelligence and judgment of women. Women certainly did not have enough sense to vote or to manage financial affairs. But the funny thing is, Abigail Adams was just as intelligent as her husband. She was very sharp. And he was away practically all of their married life. And she managed the family's business affairs while he was away, and she did quite a good job of that. So another spirit who came in and I did in this last history book that I published this summer, first in law, first in leadership, about trading America's first leaders. There's a lot in there about ethics, ethical conduct in government. And so I didn't use any of the channeling from Abigail, but I thought she should have a part in that book. So I went back and used some of the things she had actually written about the need for ethical leaders and her concern about ego in people in high places in government and how dangerous that was to our democracy. Okay, so we have another unexpected spirit who came in, an opportunistic spirit, but we were talking about her in great depth. So I couldn't do the Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson book without asking him about slavery and about his relationship with Sally Hemings. Well, Sally came in. The medium didn't know. She lives in Indiana. She didn't know anything about Sally Hemings. But she said there's a spirit that wants to come in, and she's a woman. Could she possibly have been a slave? I said, yeah, maybe Sally's coming out. I don't know. So Sally, as some of you know, was Jefferson's half-sister. She was very, very beautiful. They had the same father. But Sally was the slave, and Jefferson's wife was his wife. And Jefferson's wife died young. I think Jefferson was, he's still fairly young man when she died. And on her deathbed, she made him promise solemnly that he would not remarry. I got real mad at Katie Couric one time because when Bill Clinton was fooling around, she was listing all the presidents who'd had affairs outside of marriage, and she listed Jefferson. That made me mad because his wife was long dead when Sally came along. So he never cheated on his wife. So she came in, and it was confirmed by both of them that they had had a very close and good relationship, but it was very, very private. He had a great deal of respect for her. He cared for her deeply. But she deeply resented his not acknowledging her and valuing her publicly. And he gave a reason for that he wanted to accomplish so much on the national scale that he couldn't expose himself to a lot of controversy about his personal life. So he tried to keep his personal life private. But he said he knew that wasn't exactly the right thing to do. But she says that from her place in spirit, she has no resentments now. When we transition, we tend to lose our resentments, our ill will. And she says that historically she has made a difference. And this is seen in her depiction now, finally, at Monticello. You go up there and everybody's talking about Sally and about how the slaves built everything. So, they're having their say now at Monticello. Okay, there was another spirit who entered in without being asked to be present, and this will really blow your mind. Did not expect this. On August 30th of this year, I arranged a session with Jana to talk with my brother who had just died. And he came in. He was just recently arrived, still processing things, but learning how he could have lived his life differently. He was very specific about that. He was a very driven businessman. So somewhere in the conversation, I mentioned that I've been studying some of Edgar Cayce's predictions about catastrophic events that will change the shape of the earth. I think he said there was going to be some huge overflow of water from the north, and it was going to divide this continent into two halves. And a lot of very other dire predictions that would change the course of humanity's history. So anyway, I got home. I said, is that going to happen anytime before I die? And I've always been a prepper. I've always thought before I die that I would live through some very difficult times. I don't know why, but I've just had that premonition. So I'm a little bit of a prepper. I have, as Jim knows, I have some extra food stashed away in the freezer. So at the mention of Edgar Casey's name, and everybody should do that because the lights will go out at some point, you know. Our enemies are going to turn the lights out here at some point. At the mention of Edgar Casey's name, the medium said that the energy was shifting and somebody else was coming into the conversation. Could this be Edgar Casey? I said, wow, I never would have dreamed of asking for Edgar Casey. He's way above my pay grade. So I was surprised and humbled. I could never imagine myself in the presence of what I consider to be an ascended master. How many people here follow Edgar Casey or are familiar with his work? Okay. So this is what the entity presenting as Edgar Casey had to say about his predictions. And I'm quoting here. I went back. All these sessions are recorded, although I take notes as I go along. But I went back any number of times to get the right words as they came out. Okay. One predicts with the information that is coming in at the moment. The danger is someone writing this down, because things always change. People needed to be awakened, and one way to do that was to warn about disasters and extreme changes. Some of the most extreme earth shifts will not take place, but there still will be disasters, earthquakes, volcano eruptions, fires, and floods. Of course, we're already seeing that. The future is more challenging to read now because changes are happening so fast. The planet is going 90 miles an hour. I do know there will be great changes ahead. People will be denied the comforts and distractions of today. They will need each other more. They will need to help each other. Everyone will be affected. The end of that quote. I asked about my being a prepper and having some food stored. Great idea, was the answer. The Casey entity said that in the future our comforts will be layered in survival functions. The water coming out of the tap, heating, cooling, food, and the other things we take for granted will be compromised. He said sharing will be very important. He said, this can no longer be a world of me, me, me. Sharing will affect the outcome of humanity on earth. How much energy is coming from the heart and how much is coming from fear? We are in a very fear-based society right now, and we have to fight not dwelling in that fear all the time because it's negative. In the spirit of brotherhood, it is best to put some extra provisions aside to share with your neighbors. Another ascended friend in the conversation agreed. He said in earlier times, people were more self-sufficient with their own gardens and farms. They shared more with neighbors of their community. They weren't dependent on a few large corporations to deliver food in trucks to stores as you do today. Get more involved in your community. Get to know your neighbors. Go to the farmer's market. Shake the farmer's hand so that your dependence on outer forces is diminished. So my husband, Jim, has been a good sport about my being a prepper and taking part of the freezer for my food. So when I told him about the reading, he said, oh, no, we're going to have to build a shed now for all your stuff. But anyway, I don't over-prep. I'm just a modest prepper. Next slide. I've had interesting talks with these people, but no, I didn't think I could get a book. Jim and I were in France a year or so ago, and we went to the wonderful monastery where Van Gogh spent his last year. And we had kind of a spiritual experience there. It was beautiful, and we felt his presence was around. And it also helped us understand his paintings. There's a very strong wind in that part of France. It's in his paintings. And I've never read anything about that, but it explains a lot of his work. And he would paint in the wind. Anyway, I thought, wow, this is going to be a great book. And I wrote a really good introduction to it after we came back from France. But then when I talked with somebody presenting as Van Gogh, it kind of went flat because he said after being mentally ill and having such a hard life in that last century, he had decided to incarnate for a quiet life now. And he was living a very dull life in comparison today. And he was really bored with it. So I thought, okay, well, probably no book there. So then I thought, well, what about Steve Jobs? I bet he's got some really good things to say. So I asked the medium to access him. It's a good thing that the session was recorded because a lot of it was kind of over my head. I couldn't write fast enough to keep up with it. I enjoyed the conversation, but I didn't feel that there would be a book. But I will share with you some of the interesting things that he had to say. As most everybody knows, his visionary approach led to groundbreaking innovations, such as the Apple computer, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. And I was particularly interested in what were reported to be his last words as he died. Who knows what his last words were? Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. Well, obviously he was seeing something on his deathbed. I wondered what it was. So, was he seeing like angels or Jesus or Buddha or God Almighty? What was he seeing? So, and I'll say what he said in a minute, but I tried to understand everything that he had to say, but at the end of the session, I said, well, I might have trouble writing a book here because I'm doing my best to understand what you're saying. You're a little above my pay grade. And I said, and I don't know how well this would be understood by average readers just getting it off the shelf. They probably wouldn't believe it. And I said, it would be misunderstood. And I said, when I mentioned being misunderstood, he said, join the club. He said that he accessed his inventions from a higher plane through meditation and sometimes with the aid of drugs. He said that his inventions, all inventions, were like low-hanging fruit from a higher dimension. They're there. They're just waiting to be downloaded. And sometimes when an invention will come in, it'll come in different parts of the world. People will be working on the same thing in different parts of the world. They're downloading the same thing from a higher plane. He said that he spent his whole life being curious, being an explorer into consciousness. He was always open to the vastness of universal knowledge, to dimensions beyond this one. He found that the earth plane is enveloped in a web. He was guided to create devices to connect people on that web. He said that his intentions for mankind's use of technology had been relatively pure in the beginning to help mankind. Better than the intentions of Bill Gates. He had some things to say about Bill Gates, whom he called a parasite and an imposter, stealing his ideas and making them his own with a few modifications. He said the picture of them creating their inventions in a garage is a myth. He said that early on he realized that Gates didn't have the same sensibilities, the same consciousness to what he, Steve Jobs, was bringing in. Jobs said that later in his life he had been circling the idea of creating a new energy source that would replace the ones that now use Earth's resources. He said that on the other side he works with a team, including with Tesla and others whose names are not well known. They are attempting to help us advance on this side. So this brings up the idea of like spirits kind of getting together on the other side. Like Leonard says he's with musicians. Thomas Jefferson is with more philosophical people. They're still interested in government. And the technical people kind of band together and try to help us with our technology. Apparently that's kind of what I'm getting. So he works with a team on the other side, including with Tesla and others whose names are not as well known. They're attempting to help us. But he says there's opposition to that. He mentioned that there are dark forces that have been attempting to hold people back. But he says that many more people on earth are coming into their own power now. And he said that was what Jesus was teaching before the church got corrupted, that we need to come into our own power and no longer be slaves to our institutions and to our limited thinking. That if we kind of connect with the way Jesus connected with the higher power, we could heal people too if we knew the energy sources. He was connected to a higher energy source. Anyway, so I mentioned that he had died in his prime years, that he didn't live to be an old man. He said that he was tired. The more he accessed the vastness of knowledge, the more tired he grew. He also had misconceptions about how to take care of his body, kind of like Leonard Cohen and a lot of other people. He kept ignoring the needs of his body as he worked incessantly. He knew he didn't eat right. He worked all the time. He didn't get enough rest. He didn't go to doctors when he got sick. He said that didn't go down too well. He died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 56. But he added that he did what he came for. He was done. So then I asked him what he saw as he died that was so awe-inspiring. He said that he could see the great vastness of the universe and the connection between everyone and everything, a totality of oneness. And here we are in the Unity Church. That's what they preach here, I think. The formless experience of enlightenment beyond whatever he had previously thought was enlightenment. In effect, he had a view of the awesome, glorious World Wide Web that unites everything on Earth and in the universe. That was his vision. So I'm getting ready to wrap up, but I want to wrap up with this slide. Has anybody read this book? My medium, I think, recommended this book. I'd never heard of it, but I really encourage you to read this book. So the author, I don't like to use her, she didn't write, she transcribed readings with these famous people. And her name is Tina Louise Spalding. She was a very reluctant channeler for this book. She was too humble to receive messages from all these famous people. And she had a lot of trepidation throughout the book with each channeling. But I really recommend this book. There are remarks by Dr. Jonas Salk, who is the inventor of the polio vaccine. And he has some very grave concerns about Big Pharma now. Says that when his intention in doing the polio vaccine was to help humanity, Big Pharma is out for money, and we should be aware of what they're doing. Yeah. So they're fascinating conversations with John Lennon, Michael Jackson, Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Jerry Garcia, Albert Schweitzer, Jack and John Kennedy, and others, and even Jesus is in the last chapter.
Head over.
So I really recommend this book. So
probably going to want to go get his
Tom Coates, when he said that we had attended a meeting at an Episcopal church on Dr. Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven. This is like, what did you say, 2012 when we did that? 2013, right? I think that was right after Ned died. It was not well received by some church members. They wanted to find fault with Dr. Alexander, that he was just a phony. And, he was hallucinating. He was having a brain fart, whatever. They just couldn't accept the idea of somebody going to heaven. So, next slide. So, on our side, and this is the goal of IONS, is to bridge spirituality and science. And this is happening at the University of Virginia and other university settings, and medical doctors, PhD types, they're all on to this consciousness thing. So up at UVA, they are doing serious research on the near-death experience, on reincarnation, and on after-death communications. So several years ago, the magazine Virginia Living published an article about Dr. Jim Tucker's research at UVA on the past lives of children, verified past lives. And in the next issue of the magazine, there was a letter to the editor from a snarky UVA graduate, basically saying, "This is nonsense. Why are you publishing this crap? Supported by our hard-earned tax dollars at a state university." But the fact is that tax dollars and tuition do not fund the Division of Perceptual Studies. It's funded by generous donors, and we are grateful to them. Okay, now at the end, want to introduce my husband, Jim. Remember, I gave him a birthday present, and that was the past life regression with Carol Louie. Carol couldn't be with us today. She's got an allergy reaction. So Jim will very quickly tell you about his wonderful experience, and we will answer questions at the end. If anybody would like any of my books, I'll be glad to sign them for you. They're back there. So Jim.
Take a break now. Well, thank you so much. I always learn something when she gives one of these speeches. So, as you can well imagine, I was learning a lot when I first met Suzanne. And I was very curious about all of her, all the books in her bookshelf, as she called it. And it was through Suzanne, of course, that I got introduced to ions. And while I was learning all of these experiences, Suzanne really surprised me with a past life regression. That was the last thing I thought of as a present, but it was by far one of the most interesting and life-altering experiences that I'd ever had. As it turned out, I was a pretty good student and a good candidate for this. And so, and I had been, as a teenager and also in college, I'd have been exposed to hypnosis and different things before. And so I knew a little bit about the process. And as she explained it to me, you're not going to be hypnotized. You're going to be in what I call the zone. And I realized when she explained that to me that I had put myself in similar relaxed environments myself, and had moments of flashback of one thing or another, which I didn't identify with initially. I couldn't put my hands around it or understand exactly what the experience was about, and it was like a weak TV reception back in the days when we were all trying to capture TV signals out of the air, and sometimes they would be kind of flashy, coming in and out, weak. And so I had these experiences, and I explained that to her, and she said, "Well, I want you to lie down on the couch, get relaxed, be comfortable. Here's an extra pillow," and she basically put me into what I call the zone. And as I was centering myself, she said, "Now let's follow the light, and follow the light through the hallway of your life, your past lives, and you'll see a number of doors, and you decide which door you want to go through." And I remember that I was awake, cognizant of everything that was going on, but at the same time having this experience. It was kind of like when I had cataract surgery. For those of you who had it, you're in surgery, okay? You don't feel anything, but you can hear what's going on. You can see the lights in front of you. Um, uh, and so in this particular case, I just decided to open one particular door. And as I walked through, I entered an entirely new and different dimension. I was myself. I knew it was me, but I was in a different time zone. I was in a different body. I was in a different century. I was in a different part of the world. And it was very late at night. It was early in the morning. And as I just literally walked into this body, it consumed me, and I became in that dimension. And I could feel the heaviness of the air, the dampness of the air. I knew that I was, it was very, very late, early in the morning. Nobody was out. Narrow streets. And I knew immediately that I was in China. And I didn't know where. I knew that the person, that the body that I'd entered, certainly knew where they were, but I, as the spirit coming in, didn't recognize the name of the city, but I knew it was a port. And I was headed headed towards the moorings of ships. And not only did I feel the moisture in the air and the coolness of the air, but I could see the brightness of the moon and the shimmering of the moon on the water. And I also felt the heaviness of the responsibility that this soul had, that I had when I was in this life. I was going to the port for a reason. And it was coming to me quickly, and I was explaining this to Carol, that I was the navigator and responsible for the navigation of a huge fleet of ships, and that my father had been a navigator and had died at sea, and the fleet had fallen probably to a typhoon, and had brought great shame to the family. But I had been chosen to be the navigator for this particular fleet of ships. And I felt that huge burden of responsibility and the responsibility to try to erase this shame on the family. And so I was going down to the primary ship because I couldn't sleep. We were leaving at dawn. And I remember walking up the gangplank and hearing the creaking of the ships. There was a modest crew on board. They were just there to make sure that the night watch crew, so to speak. But I felt the burden of responsibility, and I had several of his instruments, my father's instruments, that I intended to use. And then I began to fast forward with her and explain this particular fleet, and it was a massive number of ships and huge ships. And I had no historical recollection to work from. But I was freaking her out because she knew exactly who this was. She's half Chinese. She didn't say anything to me at the time. She just let me talk. And I explained to her that And this was almost like a recollection of the journey that we were on. And so this was a Chinese fleet. It was around the early part of the 1400s. It was a treasure ship or a treasure fleet. And I recall vividly stopping at a number of ports where we had ambassadors, what is in now in Myanmar or in Malaysia or in Singapore or Malacca or in the Middle East, around the Horn of Africa, and we were doing exploration work along the African coast, and we brought back exotic animals and giraffes and that sort of thing, and it was an incredible voyage of discovery. And once we returned with tribute as well as with representatives from different tribes that we met in Africa in particular, we were greeted when we brought all of these animals and all these gifts to the court of the emperor. Suzanne was in that life as well. She was my wife, but she didn't play an important part. She wasn't. I mean, I was aware that she was my wife in that life.
You were gone all the time.
I was gone. Right. So that particular, that was about a 2-hour session, I think. And then when we finished, she said, "Do you have any idea what that was about?" I said, "Well, I've always had an affinity for the Chinese. I have worked and lived in Asia, and lived in Hong Kong, and but I don't know enough about the Chinese history to know anything about a treasure fleet." And she said, "This was before Columbus, when the Chinese had the largest ships in the world. And it's well documented. There are 7 voyages by a master navigator explorer by the name of Cheng Shi, and it was a period of enlightenment in the dynasty, and that particular dynasty, which then closed, and they burned all of the ships after 7 voyages. But some of them were as big as 1,000 yards. They were huge, huge ships, bigger than anything built by the Europeans. And so it's put me on a journey to learn more about that. Okay, I was not that person. I was a navigator working for him, so to speak. But that was my experience with her. And to say that that was life-altering is putting it mildly, because I can tell you I was there. Any questions? Yes.
Anybody have any questions? I have a mic over here.
Or I should say, do you have any questions for either one of us?
So in relation to your life here,
Right.
what was the most important thing that you got out of that? That's relative to your life here, if you can share it.
Well, it's hard to explain. I've had several other past life regressions, and so when I think about it, I kind of put them all in context, okay, as opposed to one individual experience.
Oh, okay.
May I say something?
Yeah.
In all of his regressions, there's been Roman, Scottish, English, Chinese, anything else?
Prehistoric.
Prehistoric. Okay. I've been in every one of them as his wife.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That was And that has led us to believe that we are the same soul, that we split at times into different bodies. And that's why when we met each other from a distance of 1,500 miles and began a correspondence relationship, the energy, the need for us to communicate was so strong. And so that's what all my past life regressions has done. It's reinforced those feelings that I had for Suzanne, somebody that I didn't speak to her until we had had almost a month's worth of correspondence every day. We never had a phone conversation. I met her online. Okay. So what was this emotional draw? This very, very uncharacteristic of me as an individual at that time. I couldn't explain it. Okay. So the past life regressions helped explain all that for me. It kind of put that in context.
I see.
Okay. I hope that helped.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I've had a session with Karen too, so. And that's why I asked the question.
Right.
To Suzanne, when was the last time you had any communication with Thomas Jefferson? Did you have anything recently?
I think he came into the one I had in August with Edgar Casey. I think he had something. Oh, I think he was the one who said that you should shake hands with the farmer and get close to nature. I think that was him. But yeah, I've had past talks with him. I'll ask for him, and I will ask him if he's happy with the book.
I was just curious.
Yeah, he says
if he had said any, or if you had asked him about anything about what's going on here.
The book, that Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson, those readings took place in the first part of 2020. What he said about government, about corruption, ego, money, all that, really supersedes any particular generation.
Yeah.
It goes back a long way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what Thomas Jefferson might add, given our present situation in the world. Reading the metaphysical, I felt it so genuine, so familiar, and yet it seems that we need to read between the lines as to what we're called to do.
Okay. Well, I tell you one thing. He would have been horrified by the amount of money spent on this last election. He did not like big money in elections. He felt that people should, of course, in a presidential election, you can't shake everybody's hand, but say in a congressman needs to go around and shake everybody's hand and be close to the people and not rely on, as he called, slick advertising and dubious ads of dubious truth. Yeah, he'd be shocked by what's going on now.
Suzanne, you talk about your communicating with those who have passed, and you also talk about reincarnation. Are these beings in two places at once? They are still exists as Thomas Jefferson, and then there's another Thomas Jefferson who's a little boy somewhere in China or whatever.
Yeah, I don't fully understand all that. All of us, we have a greater soul. Our soul is far greater than what inhabits this body. Now, you asked Tom Coates, he says he's got don't you have a twin here somewhere on Earth, Tom? Twin soul? Aren't you divided into half?
On occasion I have been, not currently, although I do have other concurrent lifetimes on another planet right now.
So
Not
when
on Earth.
yeah, so when I accessed Thomas Jefferson, he said, "Let me dust off that persona," because he's had many lives, and so he has to get back into that mindset of what he had in that life. And then I've heard that Edgar Cayce said he tried to reincarnate in a young boy back in the 1940s. That didn't work out very well. So yeah, we can, our souls are so much greater than just our little bodies here. Yeah.
To answer Price's question a little bit more, I have on myself connected with the souls of people who are incarnated who I knew earlier, who now or I know later as other people, but you can still connect with the soul of the person who passed away. Mm-hmm. Because of what you say, the soul is a very powerful instrument, and it can be in multiple places at the same time.
I've read, everybody in this room, if you could see your soul, you would be amazed. Our souls are awesome. They're wonderful.
I wonder if I could comment on that just for a moment. Because I can hear you a lot.
There is a theory in reincarnation in conjunction with how our souls work, so to speak, is that there's a portion of our soul that never incarnates in the physicality. The soul that is me, there's a portion of that has never incarnated in this material world, and it's there in heaven, it's in spirit now. Mm-hmm. So you can speak to and I have always deemed that I've used the term the higher self. That's the portion of you that's always on the other side. So Thomas Jefferson's higher self can always be contacted on the other side in the method you have done, and he may be incarnated someone in this room today. But
that's right.
Does that kind of cover it?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yes.
Yeah, my understanding. There.
Thank you. Hi, this has been great, really interesting. And this is more a question, I guess it ties into near-death experiences or when you're almost getting ready to die. I guess in my father-in-law's case and in my aunt's case, they both saw like their father, I think, coming down to sort of get them right before they were getting ready to die. I know in my father-in-law's case, he was telling his wife, don't you see my dad right here? Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious as to your views on that and how that might tie into your work. And have you heard that a lot from other people?
Yeah, heard that a lot. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a way to help our transition when we see somebody that we know we feel more comfortable in leaving with that person. Not everybody leaves with a loved one. Some people get right in the tunnel and shoot right up. But the best story I ever heard about that, this also goes along with do not resuscitate. If somebody is seeing angels and people coming for them, do not resuscitate them. They are ready to go. They want to go. It's mean to keep them hooked up in the hospital for another week or two. So the cutest story I ever heard about that, and this is my friend Katie, the first medium I ran into. She was also a hospice worker, and this is in her book, Friends in High Places. There was a farmer in Rockbridge County who had farmed the family land with his brother for many years. His brother's name was Fred. Fred had died. So this farmer was dying in hospice. And his last words were, "Oh, there's Fred coming over the hill on a tractor, and it's a double-seater." And that was giving him comfort that he was being guided on to the other side, by his loved one. Yeah. Yeah, that's very common for people to be greeted. Now, I did hear a friend of mine said, I shouldn't even say this, it's probably not very nice, that her ex-husband came to get her. And she said, "Not you, Harry, I want to go with you." Of course, Harry, was an ascended soul by then. He had gotten rid of all of his bad qualities. But
Anything else? If not, we'll turn it back over to Tom.
Very,
Yeah.
very